So, my name's Tim East, and I'm helping with the Cotuit Chronicles this summer. We've had a lot of very interesting sessions. So tonight we're going to have another one. I think this will be really good. I'd like to introduce Greg Ketchen, and Greg is a retired captain with the U.S. Coast Guard, where he spent 31 years serving our nation. And I think that alone should be a big thank you, because it's quite a sacrifice. But what I'm really interested in tonight is the Coast Guard is such an important part of our nation's defense and protecting us and taking care of us both in times of crisis and in times of conflict. And a lot of people don't appreciate that, but it's something I think we'll learn more about tonight and learn to appreciate. And so I'll things over to Captain Greg. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here. It's not that long a trip. I just live over in Austria nearby, so I didn't have to come that far. But I'm leaving tomorrow morning early because it is our 55th anniversary for graduation from the Coast Guard Academy. For those that aren't familiar with it, it's the smallest of the four military academies in West Point, Annapolis, and Air Force outsizes us by, in some cases, an order of magnitude. But same exact pay, the same exact. We think ours is better than class. I had a chance to actually teach there too for 4 years. My graduate work was in oceanography, and that love of the Coast Guard, and in fact marine science and oceanography, came from the times I come down here. I grew up out near Amherst, Mass, town called Belchertown, for those that know that part of the state, and used to come down here for the summers and really developed a like for the marine environment. It led to my undergraduate and graduate in degrees in oceanography, physical oceanography to be precise. But that said, I did spend quite a bit of time in the Coast Guard, and it was really very proud of what I was able to do, and it was challenging in a positive way. I've had a chance to do all sorts of things. That's what I'll be talking a little bit tonight. The Coast Guard is much more diverse than you might appreciate. Even people in the Coast Guard don't always appreciate how diverse it is. Just as a quick example, only because I know my own career, so I can give that as a quick example. I just mentioned I had a chance to teach in a faculty, that was part of it, but I had command of a NATO station in the Mediterranean. That's not what you think about the Coast Guard. I did glacier surveys on the west coast of Greenland. Did research in the Caribbean. It was just all over the world. Had a station in New York City and then in Boston. My last command was something called Sector Boston now, which had all the small boat stations at cutters down from the New Hampshire border down, but not including the Cape. There's a separate office in Woods Hole, for those who are familiar with the Coast Guard office down there. So they had the rest of the South Shore. So enough about me. Well, one more thing about me, and it's the next slide, is that I have been, give me very specific instructions here. I have been serving for the last decade as the president of the Coast Guard Heritage Museum. In fact, a little bit of self-promotion or advertising possibly. I haven't been there, stopover. It's much more than you would think. It's not just a little man's cave with some patches and ball caps. It is an amazing amount of artifacts we get in there. From the 1700s and historic things that we get all the time. So it's always changing around. And certainly we're all volunteers there. Many of us are veterans. So if you want to support, you're welcome. This is not an advertisement, but support us. We've been there now for 21 years, and I really strongly believe getting better every minute, certainly every year with new exhibits. What I'm going to be talking about today, though, is sort of general, but it's about early Coast Guard history. I'm gonna start out modern and then go old for a bit. But what's behind me here, that painting you see there, is I'm going to lead up to that because it is significant what's happening there. It's a process that began 25 years ago. It's creating a major memorial for the Coast Guard in the State House. This is 1/16 the size of what the original is, and it's being produced. It's going to be done next month and installed up in the State House. It'll be viewed by 100,000 people a year, is our really solid estimate from the security, looking at how many people pass this place. I'll talk about that later, but it's exciting. That said, the Coast Guard Heritage Museum is there to do several things: protect and preserve, and then celebrate Coast Guard history. And there's a lot to celebrate here on the Cape. For example, living at Cape, most people don't appreciate this. The first aircraft to fly across the Atlantic Ocean took off from Cape Cod. Charles Lindbergh was heroic, non-stop, solo, New York to Paris. But the first aircraft was 8 years before, 1919. That's 8 years. It took off from Chatham. Coast Guard pilot with some Navy on board. It's a big aircraft, and it flew across went to Halifax, then to Newfoundland, then to the Azores and to Portugal. But it was the first, just at the end of World War One. Again, it's something. The problem, which I'll get to here in a second, is that there's so much history here in Massachusetts that some of the stuff it just disappears. It's not highlighted. But the Coast Guard, some of you may realize that it is one of the military armed services, and same ranks as the Navy, share a lot of things with the Navy. We used to be the smallest, but now the new Space Force is smaller than we are, so it's nice to have someone a little smaller than we are. The size of the Coast Guard is about the same size as the, what's a good analogy? About the same size as the New York Police Department. 55, 60,000 people, in a variety of missions, which I'll also get to in a second. But it has some unique features that are important. Bill mentioned one. The Coast Guard only becomes a part of the Department of, I'll still call it Department of Defense, in times of war, or when we go into a war theater. For example, if I had been transferred to the Middle East as a captain, I would probably have Navy detachments, Marine detachments working for me. I may be working for a Navy admiral, so it's a full integration. During World War II, we actually, other than the local missions of search and rescue along the coast, the Coast Guard became part of the Navy during that time, part of the Department of Defense. But what's unique about the Coast Guard is other times it's not part of the Department of Defense. Thus, this term has come into, maybe you never heard it before, but it's come in the news quite a bit, posse comitatus. Posse comitatus is a regulation that says it's for an act from the late 1800s. That was done to prohibit the Department of Defense personnel, meaning active duty military. National Guard is a little anomaly on the side, but active duty military, for enforcing laws against U.S. citizens. Not allowed. Hopefully it continues that way. The Coast Guard, though, is different because other than when we're working with the Navy or with the Department of Defense, we're under the Department now of Homeland Security. I'll talk about how we got to Homeland Security in a second, but posse comitatus means that we can pull people over for violations of law. For example, if they're boating while intoxicated or whatever it might be. Some of the, excuse the expression, wise-ass people coming in may pull, a naval vessel may pull them over for maybe smuggling drugs or whatever it might be. And they'll say, well, you can't touch me, I'm a U.S. citizen. And then we have Coast Guard officers on board, and so the Navy guy will say, hey, Joe, would you come forward here for a minute? And then they can enforce those laws and arrest the people. It's amazing that the Navy, if they pull somebody over and is a U.S. citizen on a boat and has drugs, they can't do anything. Theoretically, supposedly not do anything. Again, I'm not going to get into politics, but it seems to be changing now. But that posse comitatus was an act that prevented that from happening. So the Coast Guard, it's interesting enforcing laws. When I was commissioned in the Coast Guard, I also was commissioned as a customs officer. I've never used that authority in my life, but I have that authority because the Coast Guard used to be part of the Treasury Department. So posse comitatus used to be sacred. Again, things are changing rapidly in the last few months, but it's said that the Coast Guard can be involved in enforcing laws against U.S. citizens. Maritime laws, logical things like smuggling drugs, operating, like a police officer, operating a vessel negligently, that sort of thing. But that's that. Now, most of you are aware of some of what the Coast Guard does. This is pretty obvious. What's not obvious is changing the Okay.
It worked once.
Here, I'll come
Press your space
I
bar.
can do it here.
Press the space bar.
Here,
Okay, now the other way.
There you go. Oops.
Yep, I just went too far. Okay, yeah.
There you go.
Most of you are familiar, I think, with the Coast Guard's search and rescue mission. That's going out and saving boaters, saying anyone that's involved in marine disaster of any sort or an emergency situation. And that typically the resources see that are helicopters and rescue swimmers and boats going out. That's the most common mission. It's a very satisfying mission. Frankly, when you save some people, it's really emotionally satisfying for you, among other things. But it also includes response to natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, and pulling people off rooftops and jumping into the water with rescue swimmers, which I've never quite understand. The rescue swimmer's job is to jump out of a perfectly good helicopter into the water. And I would prefer to stay up on the helicopter. I know it's going to be safe. But that's one mission that came out of, well, I'll get back over here to the painting behind me, how it evolved. Let me try this again. Another mission that, I may have to continue doing it this way. Another mission that I think most of you are familiar with that Coast Guard has is the aids to navigation. This is the classic lighthouses, buoys. In more recent years, it's been electronics. GPS has taken a lot of that away, but Loran was a form of navigation, Omega, those were all run by the Coast Guard. Light ships back in the 1800s were Coast Guard in essence. I'll say what I mean essence here in a bit. Another form is the law enforcement, and I mentioned some of that. Drug interdiction, very satisfying, obviously, if you can remove drugs from being smuggled in the United States. And basic things like, as I said, negligent operation of vessels and a variety of other laws. What's a little less satisfying, I have to say, is enforcement of illegal immigrants coming in. That's not necessarily, and it's something that I suppose needs to be done if someone's coming in and stopping them from coming in. But these are people fleeing their country and in really tough shape, and then getting them before they arrive in the United States and returning to their home country is not the brightest day, but it's part of our responsibility. Much better saving people from the water. That's much more satisfying. So law enforcement is something that is, I think most people understand those three: search and rescue, aids and navigation, and law enforcement. But there's so much more. For example, ice breaking. We are the major U.S. ice breaking force in the Arctic and Antarctic. We have all the vessels that do that. We're getting more now under the current administration. In a positive sense, they're getting more icebreakers to help, because as the polar ice cap in the Antarctic melt, it turns out that more vessels could get up there, which frees up some of the international waters, access to resources, mining resources, that sort of thing. And also just, you can now take a cruise ship up into the Arctic and go across the Northwest Passage over to Alaska most years, in its most recent years, because of the warming of the atmosphere and the melting of the ice. So that's a mission. Other missions you may not be familiar with is national defense. As I said, we work very closely with the Navy. My Navy friends, I have a lot of close friends that are Navy. They kid me, said, well, to be in a Coast Guard, you have to be over 6 feet, so if your vessel goes down, you can wade ashore. They know we've been all over the world. So I kid them because we are the senior, as older naval service. I mean, I appreciate that the Navy existed. Really, the U.S. Navy didn't exist during the Revolutionary War. It's a continental Navy. After the Revolutionary War, it was dismissed. It wasn't there. It didn't exist. They weren't reformed until later in the 1790s, 1797 and 1898. It's debatable exactly. Actually, it's debatable exactly what the birthplace is of the Navy. A lot of people claim to be the birthplace of the Navy. But the Coast Guard started in 1790, so we're about 8 years senior to so when I say different things. But we also say that the Coast Guard is a workforce of the force of which the Navy and Department of Defense build around during a time of war. Maybe a little exaggeration. But this is the shot, believe it or not, this was in the Black Sea in Odessa just before the war broke out. They were over there training some of the Ukrainians on defense and search and rescue, and it's not just search and rescue, but it's a lot of operations. They were not a good match against the Russian forces, though, as we learned. But they learned, and it was we were part of the Sixth Fleet. The Sixth Fleet thought it was easier to send in a Coast Guard vessel white, less danger. It was pretty vulnerable, though, because we did not have missile systems for defense. So Russians could have easily, it would have been a disaster. For us, it would have been a disaster, but for world peace, it's essentially attacking a NATO force. So on a little bit later scale, we have a whole other mission, which I haven't alluded to here much, called marine safety, which didn't really become part of the Coast Guard, hard to believe, until World War II. And that includes marine environmental protection, it includes licensing of captains, it includes captains of the port and motions in the port, all these activities. This is a little bit of an exaggeration, but you see the Coast Guard vessel there. dealing with a slightly larger vessel coming up on it. There's no danger there. They were just, I don't know exactly what this mission was about, but these are regulations inspecting. We have Coast Guard inspectors all over the world in the shipyards because the ships have to be certified to enter U.S. ports. And the inspectors, the Coast Guard inspectors are there while it's being built, and then they can come into U.S. ports. If they're not certified, they just can't do business with us. All right, let me just give a Coast Guard 101 history. It began, as I said, in 1790. This is the second year of Washington's first administration. If you know that history, it was 1789 that the administration, the Constitution was finally approved, and they started the U.S. government. Washington took control, and Hamilton, as a treasurer, decided that one of our only source of revenue is to tariffs and taxes and so forth. Didn't have an income tax and so forth. So they formed the U.S. Customs Service in 1789, but everyone was going around it. The official vessel would come in and wouldn't bother landing. So they finally decided they needed a revenue cutter. A cutter is just a vessel. It's an old name that goes back. It could be revenue ship service, I suppose, but revenue cutters have been a traditional name of Coast Guard vessels in general today even. But the Revenue Cutter Service formed in 1790 and worked closely with the customs. That's why I mentioned earlier, when I was commissioned as a customs officer because it was a very close link. Here in Cape Cod, for example, the main customs office was over where the museum is right now, the customs house on Route 6A. But that customs officer there was in charge of all the customs for the Cape and the islands. And he was also in charge, because he was a senior treasury official, he was also in charge of appointing or selecting people for the life-saving stations, for the lighthouse stations, even a revenue cutter, although we didn't have any revenue cutters down here on Cape. They were stationed up in Boston. Well, they would come down here, but so it started then in 1790, sort of. I'll come back to why I mean sort of. So we look at the Coast Guard, the birth of the Coast Guard is August 4th in 1790 when Washington signed this legislation that was created by Hamilton and Treasury Department. I really kind of look at Washington has so many things that he's the father of. He's really kind of the father of Coast Guard because he was most involved. Hamilton wasn't necessarily a military guy. He was very successful at the end of the war, but they worked together and they created this revenue cutter fleet of 10 vessels. The first of which was the Revenue Cutter Massachusetts, built up in Newburyport. That's significant. The Coast Guard looks at Newburyport or Massachusetts as the birthplace of the Coast Guard. It was the first cutter, and 9 others were built and became the first fleet. This again well before the Navy. So it was our national defense. They were the ones that if there was the Barbary pirates, for example, wars with those, and we got involved in various things. So that was the Department of Treasury. Move forward some up on a left-hand side. I have a pointer here, but I've discovered over the years that a laser pointer doesn't show up on a screen, so I can point here, but you're not going to see anything, sadly. And when I first got into the Coast Guard in 1967, I'd been in for about a year, we moved out of the Treasury Department into the new Transportation Department, if you remember that from the 60s. In fact, Governor Volpe from Massachusetts was the first Secretary of Transportation at the time. So we then became part of transportation. I thought it made sense because of all the marine safety stuff going on in vessels that we would become transportation. And then when we became, after 9/11, we moved into this other new department, the Department of Homeland Security. We evolved during this time. I kind of thought, when I first got into the Coast Guard, we thought of ourselves sort of as you would view or work with a fireman. They're there to take your cat out of your tree, or if you're in distress, they'll come out and give you gasoline and so forth. That evolved to, by the late 80s, we had become more like police officers, armed, enforcing laws. Not that police officers aren't good too, it's going to be, but it's just that the psyche changed. Now, I think Coast Guard people are thought more of as soldiers and sailors. That's probably an unfair comparison because it wasn't that sharp of change. It wasn't a major change that you're a soldier today, you're a police officer before, and a fireman before that. But it evolved, so now we're under Homeland Security since for the last 25 years or 24 years. On the bottom, it shows the Revenue Cutter Service in 1790. It shows the other service was the life-saving service that wasn't formed until after the Civil War, and then the lighthouse service which was formed earlier but didn't become part of the Coast Guard until later. Becoming part of the Coast Guard is part of the storyline. The Coast Guard name only goes back to 1915. We think of our history going back much further than that because we had these three organizations, the Lighthouse Service, the Revenue Cutter Service, and the Life Saving Service, which merged in the early part of the 20th century to become the Coast Guard. So it brought all these missions with it. As I said, search and rescue, law enforcement, all that came in under that. But if we look at the history of the Coast Guard, the Lighthouse Service, the first lighthouse was 1716, so you could say that's the birth of the Coast Guard if you want. The Life Saving Service was preceded by something called, believe it or not, the Massachusetts Humane Society. Actually, the full name is the Humane Society of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Nothing to do with animals and pets. This was humane humans. There, for example, they were one of the founders of Mass General Hospital. The first chairman of it, or president of the Humane Society, was Governor Winthrop, our first governor. And many of the members, the 12 members, were of the elite, Saltonstalls and Brahmin, essentially, if you will. Doctors, legislators, clergy. Their initial mission was to help mariners in distress. There wasn't a system in place for that. So let me move on one here. I mentioned earlier that there's such a rich maritime history here, but it's overshadowed by so many other things that have happened in Massachusetts. The Pilgrims, what we're going through now, 250th, and all the stuff that occurred here during prior to the Revolution, and I mean everything. The 54th Regiment and during the Civil War, and so many things that the maritime history in any other state would be a major. For example, North Carolina says first in flight with the Wright brothers. We could easily have first to fly across the Atlantic, if you will, but that's just overshadowed by so much else. I'm not saying that's bad at all. It's nice to have such a rich legacy of history, but part of my role at this museum is to celebrate that rich history, and particularly in Cape Cod, it's significant. So many things have happened here that people aren't aware of. So I really welcome the opportunity to share these things. Let me say, why was Massachusetts so involved with the Coast Guard? Well, first of all, there was the ports, the Salem, the Gloucester, New Bedford, and obviously the Boston ports that were significant. This was the interstate highway system at the time. I put a modern map up here only because the older maps don't show with accuracy what the coastline looked like. But there was so much traffic coming down along here, and understand that the assistance for these vessels was minimal. There weren't search and rescue stations. There weren't boats that could go out and rescue them. There weren't even radios they could call and say I'm in distress. They were moving up and down the coast, and there wasn't good navigation. For those that have studied this, it was John Harrison in the mid-1700s that finally developed a reliable chronometer, marine chronometer. And if you've ever been involved, I suspect probably many of you haven't, in celestial navigation, a marine chronometer is critical. If you don't have that, then you don't know your longitude. So you know your latitude, so you know if you're going across the Atlantic, eventually you're going to bump into something, but you don't know where you are as you move across. It was John Harrison that developed the chronometer, and that changed some, but still you're moving into an environment that's not well mapped at the time, treacherous storms coming through. If you think of yourself moving up the coast here in a square rigger, for those that have done any sailing, a square rig vessel can go into the wind some, but it's not like a vessel with staysails and so forth that can go close to the wind. They're pretty much immune from going right into the wind very, very much. So as you're working way up the coast, if you have a nor'easter, it's pushing you right on the coast here. We've had over 3,000 shipwrecks in the area you can see here over the last 400 years. Some of them are well known, the Andrea Doria, the Argo Merchant. The first one was the Sparrowhawk in 1626 that was in Orleans. So that said, to finally, and we're still a British colony at the time, finally when we became a country, many people got together, particularly in Boston, said, we need more. The only thing that existed at the time were a few lighthouses. There was the lighthouse over in Nantucket from the mid-1700s. There was the lighthouse in Boston, 1716. There's the Highland Light, or what used to be called Cape Cod Light, that was 1797. That was it. That's all the protection. They just had to work their way up the coast. I say there's been a roughly 3,000 shipwrecks. I say roughly because we don't know. Ships would leave Salem, for example, head to the Far East, never come home. Did they crash on the Cape or not? There weren't a lot of people living there at the time. So anyway, there was a need for more navigation, and particularly with the importance of the port of Boston, they needed to assist mariners. The initial stimulus for this Massachusetts Humane Society was to have, they were trying to deal with a way to help people that have drowned. Is there a way to bring them back to life? We could do something, or even create huts on shore to let people, if they're got stranded on a remote island, they had huts that had a little food and firewood and so forth to keep warm until somebody could save them. In fact, excuse me, it's a little indiscreet to say, but one of the things they found was that that smoke, they thought smoke was good for helping somebody that had drowned. If you get smoke into them, particularly tobacco smoke, it would bring them back to life. It wasn't true, but if you ever heard the expression, you're just blowing smoke up my rear end, that's where it came from. They thought they had bellows and they would blow smoke up the rear end of people, and I suspect some people came to life and said, "What are you doing?" So they finally decided, after 5 or 6 years, they decided that was not really the case. But they continued on with life-saving. They were the life-saving service until the U.S. life-saving service was established in just after the Civil War, as I mentioned earlier. So we look at that as one birth of the Coast Guard. Life-saving was the Mass Humane Society. Reverend Cutter I've already mentioned, and I've also already mentioned Boston Light 1716. So those three came here. This is where it all began, in Massachusetts. So having said that, I mentioned, I guess I gotta continue doing this. Okay, be that way.
Oh, it's on the touch screen.
Oh, that doesn't help then. I can't get it.
Yeah, you gotta use the mouse.
Oh, there it
I'll
is.
give you a hand.
I'm just trying to advance the slides. Just trying to get rid of. Okay, that should work now.
Yeah, so now we'll go.
I can do this.
That's the best
Okay.
solution.
Good. Best is good. I'll go for best. The I mentioned shipwrecks. There have been a lot of tragedies. A very interesting story. Shipwrecks. I've given several talks on shipwrecks before. What the causes of shipwrecks are, and the trauma in it. It's almost like a rubbernecking on a highway. People are interested in ship, but they tend to be, with very few exceptions, very tragic. Loss of life, loss of property, that sort of thing. But we have had a lot of it here. This is, I apologize earlier for that map I showed of Massachusetts. I collect old maps. This is a map from the mid-1700s showing Boston, but you can imagine vessels going in there without any navigational aids. Walk over here for a second.
Boston Harbor?
This is Boston Harbor. This is a hull got coming up here. So vessels coming in would, this is what on here is called Beacon Island, which is Little Brewster Island now, where Boston Light is located. So vessels would have to come in here, go up through this channel, cut their way through here. This is a number of islands here. Spectacle Island and others come up by that, George's Island, and come up here and into Boston Harbor. Well, this is the back bay here. Come up to Boston here, harbor here, the little island. This channel, which is now the main channel coming in, was pretty shallow. You can see some depths in here, 3, so forth. So until it was dredged, it wasn't commonly used. So most of the vessels had to come up through here. Very circuitous. It was fairly deep water, but you had to know where you were, particularly in a fog. That was not a very good way to enter the harbor. So more lighthouses are put out, and the harbor is dotted with lighthouses now from the years. But moving forward to the 21st century, obviously GPS has overshadowed a lot of that for navigation. So anyway, this is Boston Harbor. As you can see, we're needed more assistance, buoys, that sort of thing. So that came with time. But let me move ahead to the birth of the Coast Guard, because it's significant. I mentioned these things before. The Revenue Cutter in Massachusetts was 1791. It was commissioned. In the Humane Society, 1785, thereabouts. When they first met, they met in the Bunch of Grapes Tavern right near the old State House. And I think initially they were just informal meetings, and some people think of let's make a big difference. 1785, 1786 was when it started. And they still exist today. very much alive today, but not doing rescue and supporting that. They're doing awards for people who do heroic acts and so forth. They give out awards or to assist, like the Coast Guard Auxiliary when they need some additional money. So that's the Humane Society. These three elements, and again, I'm into old maps. Again, this is a map I have from 1790. Those red marks are not, I didn't put it on my map, but this is a fairly precious map to me. I just put them on the glass on the top of it. But this is showing where that one could say the Coast Guard was born. The map of the top right-hand corner is the Massachusetts. The Massachusetts was launched and commissioned up there, then moved down the coast into Boston for its home port. But a secret about this is the America's first commissioned vessel, first armed vessel the country had. Just over a year into Washington's administration, it was launched up there and came down. And the first captain was a guy named John Foster Williams. John Foster Williams had been in charge of one of the Massachusetts vessels during the Revolutionary War, so he was an experienced captain. And still well undersized to go after these men of war that were the British fleet coming in. So when he was in charge of building the revenue cutter in Massachusetts, he beefed it up a little bit, put extra guns on it and so forth. That was not a good thing for catching smugglers. We had the same problem today in the Coast Guard. The smugglers have very fast boats, shallow draft. The Massachusetts always were first, and it was great from that perspective. It was the wrong boat for the wrong mission. It was a good boat, so it only lasted about a year and a half. And then a smaller and faster boat was put in to replace it that could catch these smugglers coming in. So that was the Massachusetts. The Boston Light, as I said, 1716 was, it's not, as it turns out, the oldest lighthouse in the country because it was burned down a couple times during the Revolution. First by the Americans when the British were coming in, so they couldn't use it. They rebuilt it, then the British burned it down when they left. So it technically is not the oldest lighthouse. The oldest lighthouse site is the way of saying it correctly because they're built fairly fast. The oldest lighthouse is in a very unlikely named place called Sandy Hook, New Jersey. You think Sandy Hook would have washed into the ocean long before, but it's up on a cliff and it's way away from the ocean, so it's the oldest. Also, a technicality is Cotuit, Cohasset down here was the site of the first boat rescue station, built by and funded by the Mass Humane Society. And the first boat that was there was built in Nantucket and moved up there, all in the early 1800s. But people in New Jersey can rightly say we have the oldest U.S. life-saving station in the country, only because U.S. life-saving service didn't come in until, as I said, in the 1870s. So this is really the oldest life-saving station. So this is where it all began, and it's been heroic. This is early 1800s, sending out. This is called a breeches buoy to bring people in from offshore that are aground, or take a single boat out to save people. Now we get to this. You probably recognize this. It is our state's capital, Beacon Hill, and about 25 years ago, almost to the day, certainly it was 2000. A woman named a state legislator from here, Ruthie Provost, from some of you may remember her. She was a state legislator, representative, mostly up in the Sandwich area. Most of her district was up there, and she was her next door neighbor was a Coast Guard later became a Coast Guard admiral, and she discovered that there was no memorial of all these memorials that existed at that time. This again, they were put in 30 or 40 years ago. All the services, like the Army, the Navy, all had their own memorials, and the Coast Guard did not. She thought, that doesn't seem right. Not only are they one of the military services, but they're the one that was born here in Massachusetts. We need a memorial. This is one for the Army. I'll go back one. This is Patton giving a Silver Star to an officer from New England or from Massachusetts during World War II. And it's a great, and I guess it's a great painting. I think hopefully, as you see in a second, the painting that we have developed is significantly superior in quality to this. But we're not going to judge too much on that. This is also about 3 times larger than one we're doing, at least 2.5 times the size. But that's what existed, but it was still, the Coast Guard didn't have it. So Ruthie introduced legislation to the state, Senate, and House, and it was approved to allow a memorial to exist in the state capitol. Didn't come with any funding, but they said, yes, you can do this. So they tried, they had some energy back then in 2000, raised some money, got an artist, started the process. The artist died, which is always sort of a bad thing. The people that were involved disappeared. So we re-energized this project about almost 3 years ago now and said, we need to go follow through with this. So it, we had a budget, we set our own budget. This is an ad hoc committee. This was not working for anyone. Although the people on the committee were state legislators, art commission people, senior Coast Guard people, about 17 of us that came together to do this. And we anticipated that it's turning out to be a $200,000 project, which we thought it was going to do it right. It would need to be that way. So we took these elements that existed here, the State House and Revenue Cutter Service and a life saving service and a lighthouse, and then merged them together in a painting. This was the first painting, and I apologize for the quality, it's the best one I could find, that the artist that died produced. Trying to show all 3 elements here, the Revenue Cutter Service, the rescue boat, and the lighthouse. And it was a good first attempt, but it wasn't what we're looking for. I think he had actually talked about doing this on an engraved piece of brass. But we proceeded beyond that. We looked at this one, which was done by a revenue cutter officer in the 1880s when the city of Columbus, which is that vessel with its bow sticking out of the water, went down off of Gay Head in Martha's Vineyard. Sank, 120 people on board, 100 of them died, mostly men and women. All the women on board and children died. Not because the men were heroic, they were up trying to think, and a big wave came over and got the men and women on deck, washed them all overboard. So this is an important event that occurred. The vessel in the foreground here is the revenue cutter Dexter. The smaller boats you see in there are Humane Society, Mass Humane Society, all manned by Wampanoag Indians, Native Americans. And then the lighthouse is the lighthouse service. So something like this, we thought this would be great. Although we wanted to go back a little bit further. We wanted to show one period in time at the birth of the Coast Guard. We initially picked 1791, but that wasn't going to work because, as I mentioned, the first boats that the Humane Society had were not until the early 1800s. So it was about a decade of our problem there. If the Massachusetts was only there for a couple of years. So we finally decided, which we'll get to in a bit, of a way around that. I'll show you that later. We worked with the people at the Essex Museum and consultants on this, and we tried to pick the top 20 maritime artists in the country and sent a letter to them and said, are you interested and are you available? And without exceptions, they were all interested, except that someone said, I'm interested, but it's too big a project for me. I can't take this on. It's going to consume a whole year of my time, which it did. The guy working on it now, it's pretty much all his time. And so we could narrow it down to 10, finally narrow it down to 4. But then we're looking at artists like this. I can't think of this guy's name. Bill Davis. He's over. Bill Davis. All right, yes. Bill, great artist. And his painting is very picturesque. It's a beautiful shot, the one in the upper left-hand corner. First of all, Bill said, I'm not young enough to take this project on. Although our artists are in their 50s and 60s, but Bill is older than that. He says, I just can't do it. That was disappointing, but also we felt that we didn't want to do a placid scene. The one in the lower right-hand corner isn't quite what we wanted to do. That may be too much action, and it's not a great quality painting. These are some of the things that submitted to us. So we wanted something more dramatic. If you can think of a dramatic painting, what would come to mind? Any guesses?
Watson and the Shark. Yes.
Well, think of Washington in the Revolutionary War.
Crossing Delaware.
Yeah, well, this is it. This is more Washington crossing the street, but you get the idea. This is Washington crossing Delaware, and that was one of our goals, is to say we want something of that drama. This painting is 20 feet by 12 feet. It's gigantic, and it's just spectacular. It was done by Emmanuel Lutz, and he wasn't even in America at the time. He was in Germany, and there were a lot of inaccuracies here. We're trying to eliminate the inaccuracies. For example, not that we're going to change his painting, but make sure ours is accurate. For example, the flag up there is a Betsy Ross flag. That wasn't developed until 2 years after it crossed. The width, you can't see it very well in this picture, the width of the Delaware here looks to be about 2 miles, and it was only a few hundred yards. But drama, and the light coming in, again, it's a poor quality here, but light coming in shows the sun coming down. It was the middle of the night. So, and some of the characters here were, Washington wouldn't have been standing up in an ice field on a boat like that. So we said, we want something of that dramatic nature. So then we got it down to 4 finalists, and we had them submit artwork to us to judge. This was one of the submissions. I said, okay, that's a nice, and the guy, nice feature, a great artist, but it's too poster-like. That's not what we wanted. It is nice to have a memorial to have, but it just didn't make it. Then had this, which combined several elements. It took the, as I mentioned earlier, the Humane Society had these survival huts along the shore. But a stone hut just doesn't have much drama to it. So we said, no, these were just initial concept drawings. Then we had this one. We really liked this one, particularly little things like the reflection of Boston Light across the water was nice there, and a boat's, it had the 3 elements there, the revenue cutter and the lighthouse and a boat. But thought, no, we need some more drama than that. It turned out this was the guy we selected, but he did a lot more drama to it. Got rid of what the poster-like legend at the bottom. We don't need the letters there. It just detracts from the painting. So then he submitted, once we selected him, which is last September, and then we awarded the commission to him finally after we got all the funding straightened out, at least some of it in December. So he's been working on it since then. That included 2 months worth of research, talking to all the historians in the country, making sure it's accurate. Sally Snowman, which I don't know if you remember reading about her in a paper about 2 years ago, she was the last lightkeeper on Boston Light, first female lightkeeper on Boston Light, last lightkeeper of any lighthouse in the country. So I've known her for 20 years. She came down and talked to them about, written several books on Boston Light, and the Hull Lightsaving Museum and several other historians around the country helped out with the boat. So we got to this stage. Then the artist said, I need some models for the boat. I need some people that can, I need a young man, square-jawed, well-built, if you will. I don't mean to be indiscreet here, but somebody that's strong. I told him I was available. He said, Greg, you're too busy. So we actually, but I didn't actually offer that, but we went to, he said, this guy, a guy named Russ Kramer, his studio was in Mystic, Connecticut, as it turned out. Although we were really hoping for a Massachusetts artist, but this guy was superior. Let me take a step back on the selection process. We got into the final 4, finally, after a lot of debate. We had a 17-member committee. Got down to the final 2, and we kept getting votes, and it kept coming up tied. I said, guys, there's 17 of you. It should be tied. I don't remember whether it was 1 or 3 of them said, either one of these people, and they were both fantastic. I don't care which one. Take either one. I don't want to be the deciding vote. I said, that's not fair. One other said, flip a coin. I said, guys, we're not going to flip a coin for a $200,000 painting. And this is not just the value of it, it's the monetary value, it's the value, it's a legacy painting for the artist too.
Yeah.
One of the artists came to me and said, Greg, I really want this. I want to be able to take my grandkids here now, 20 years from now, or to see that I have this painting that's going to be viewed by this many people and a significant painting. It turned out he was one of the last 2, but he was not the one selected. And I'll share this with you. Please don't share it too far. One of the artists we determined offered one of the other artists a significant amount of money for him to drop out of the competition. Nothing illegal about it. Maybe indiscreet and ethically not, but it turned out it didn't affect anything. The 4 artists remained in competition. So this is the guy we selected. So we got to this stage of, this was called a concept drawing. So we had to submit this to the State House Art Commission for them to approve it, a lot of different levels to get approval. Then we went from that to a black and white. Again, it's pretty close. There are a lot of changes were made, subtle changes are made to this. We got to this stage, then finally got to a more complete stage here. It's hard to see the subtlety with the detail here, but this guy is great with the detail. And then we got to a color, what they call a final oil on canvas color study, and that's about a 30-inch by 30-inch painting, and it's very similar to this. This is not oil on canvas. Obviously, this was Staples printed this out for us, but it was of this size that we could take to the art commissioner for final approval. It's a study then because he then puts it up in his studio. Maybe I have a shot here in a second, and starts to work on the final thing. I learned a lot about art that I didn't know before. My experience with painting was primarily kitchen walls with a roller, but we had a very strong committee with a lot of. My job was just keep things going. So this was, believe it or not, it's hard to see here. This is the 8-foot by 8-foot canvas stretched out, and the first step is to do charcoal or pencil and sort of copy this, but sketch it out the proportion on a painting. Then the next step is to do a color underpainting, to put colors in there. This will all be covered up later, but does the underpainting. And then finally if I have a final, no, this is not really a final, but this is the artwork, the artist working on it. I apologize, I just took this morning. This was a cover of the New London Day, the newspaper down in New London on Sunday. I took a picture of him working on the artwork. I'm going down tomorrow at 12:30 to be with him with several others for a sneak peek, and then we'll finally do the final acceptance of the painting middle of October, and we'll start to move it up from there to Boston. So anyway, it is this is the final, pretty much the final version. We've even played with the framing around the outside. The framing, it's subtle, but if you look very carefully, you can see the difference between it. And we had a lot of gold around the outside, and it turned out that was getting pretty expensive by all that gilt because it's a large piece of art. So we cut out a lot of the gold, but just for the gold eagle and the lettering at the top and some gold trim on the outside. Still, the framing alone is about $8,000 or $9,000, but it's worth it. This thing at the top, the mantle, is all a carving. It's done by a guy down in Connecticut again, or he's in Rhode Island, that's doing the detail carving, a great carver. The red, white, and blue thing at the top is called a commissioning pennant that's on all Coast Guard vessels, and just brought a nice detail on top. The artist really wanted to put the commissioning pennant on the cutter. He said that's going to create motion. But I had to point out to him that the commissioning pennants weren't introduced until just after the turn of the century, so they wouldn't have been on his vessel. We couldn't tolerate that inaccuracy. So finally, see, this is the inside of the State House. If you know the Great Hall up there, it's also called the Hall of Flags or some. This entrance out here, you can see we printed out a black and white version of this and put it up on the wall just to see. We know it would fit. We had measurements. We could take a tape measure. But we wanted to see the perspective, and the art commission came up and looked at it and said, okay, this will work. The bench on there will go. Maybe the stanchions will stay, just keep it away from it. But the painting will be there. It'll be viewed. Everyone coming up these elevators. These are the main entrance to the State House. For those that have been there, you understand the front of the State House is only used for ceremonial purposes by the governor once or twice a year, maybe for ceremonial purposes. This is the main entrance. So people entering the State House come here. And it's a spectacular. It will be. My measure of success is that when people step off the elevator, their mouths will drop open and it'll stay open for 35 seconds. I think we've got to measure that. People now, even with this black and white version up here, they're overwhelmed by it, emotionally overwhelmed by it, and they said, "Boy, it would be much better if you're in color, or it would be better if you're in color." And we said, "It's coming, so it will be in color." So that's history in general, but the history is it began here in Massachusetts, and there's so many elements of that history that fit together very nicely. This is only part of the story. It's fun to tell the story because each one of these elements, the lighthouse in Boston is a story on its own. The lighthouse service, the life-saving service, there's a whole museum, the Hull Life-Saving Museum that celebrates that in Cohasset up in there. So it really is a great story. Having said that, any questions at all? Anything I can answer? I've gone on and talked awfully fast. I apologize for that, but I should have looked at.
Where's the museum located?
Glad you asked that. Yeah. It's over on the 6A on the Kings Highway. If you go from coming from the west going toward Orleans, passing the courthouse on the right-hand side. You come to a stoplight. Manickey's Wharf is down to the left. You go just past that, start up a hill after the stoplight. It's right in the right. It was the old Casa brick building. The Unitarian Church is just across the street, which before that was the East Parish Church. You know, the West Parish Church, the Rooster Church in West Barnstable. After they built that, they needed more space. They built that. That then became a Methodist church, and now it's a Unitarian church. But it's right across the street from us. So come visit. I mean, I think you'll be surprised by it. We're all volunteers, so a couple of restrictions. One is, except on special, and we have several a year, special occasions, we're only open from 10 until 3. It became obvious from the beginning that a volunteer doesn't want to spend an 8 or 9 hour day volunteering. So 5 hours goes by pretty fast, frankly. So that's one. And then we're not open on Sundays and Mondays. Sundays would seem to be a great day, but volunteers, family, going to church, other things, so many things going on. So we're not open. So Saturdays, and we're only open from the 1st of May until Veterans Day. Even from Columbus Day to Veterans Day, we cut down to 3 days a week. Long answer, it's over on 6A. Yes?
Greg, the movie that was shot out here, The Finest Hour,
Yes.
about the rescue of the Pendleton,
Yep.
The gentleman that led that mission,
Yep.
he repeated several times, well, you gotta go out, but you don't have to come back.
Well,
Was that accurate?
Let me give you a little less than a short answer to that. The guy's name was Bernie Weber.
Right.
Bernie Weber was a hero, clearly. In fact, when we got our 2 new kittens, we've always had 1 or 2 cats. Someone said you need to name them after a Coast Guard hero. I said, okay. So the cat's name, the male cat, is Bernie Weber, or Webb. It's the cat's name. Webb the cat is not a hero. Bernie Weber was a hero, so there's a difference between the two. Bernie, there was sort of an unsaid motto about you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. That's not. I was in charge of the search and rescue program at Coast Guard headquarters for several years, and we tried to dispel that. We want you to go out, but we really want you to come back. We'll give you the right equipment, we'll train you, and so forth. But if it's stupid to go out, if it's a storm, and frankly, this storm was saving these 32 people off the Pendleton, off of Chatham in 1952. Really shouldn't have gone out, but they did. They didn't expect to get back. They thought and they were very fortunate to get back. So it was heroism in the classic sense. You know, we have some exhibit over there talking about what makes a hero. A hero is making a known decision that you're putting your life in danger and loss of life to save another human being. And Bernie was that way. A great guy. He was involved in the early setup of our museum. He passed away about 15 years ago. His daughter, Patty Weber Hamilton, is still around. She's younger than I am, so I guess she's young. But that movie was a great. For those that haven't seen that movie, it was a Disney movie. It wasn't animated. Chris Pine and Casey Affleck Casey Affleck were the 2 stars in it, and it was a very good film. Disney did a nice job, and pretty accurate, frankly. Typical Disney fashion or movie fashion, they change things around a little bit. For example, the story turns into a little bit of a love story between Bernie and this woman that you get to know, and it turned out that was or would have been his wife, but they had been dating. It turned out during this rescue, they were already married. They had been married for a couple of years, so it made a much better story for Disney. That doesn't really affect the accuracy of the film, but she still was very concerned as his girlfriend or as his wife for his safety out there. It was a trauma, but the crew, 4 members of the crew, understand this is a 36-foot vessel. It's a 36-500. The vessel still exists and is still in the water over in Rock Harbor in Orleans, if you want to see it. I think by now they're about to take it out for the season, or they will very soon, and they take it over to a place that's not so prone to rough seas during the wintertime. It is essentially, the wooden hull is virtually indestructible with the type of wood that's used on it. It's not going to rot, but it does much better if it stays in the water. So even when they take it over to another place in Orleans, they usually leave it in the water, but a much better location. It's a great vessel, but the crew felt it was an unsuccessful mission. This is the feeling of many heroes and many people involved in search and rescue. They went out to save these people on this back half of this vessel with broken half. By the way, there were two of them out there, unrelated. One was going one direction, but essentially the same location. These same tankers, they're from World War II, broken half, about the same time. A crew on the outer one, a little bit another 15 miles offshore, they saved many of them, but lost many of them too. This one a little closer to shore, still another well offshore. There were, I don't know the exact number, but about 50 members of the crew. The bow broke off and they all died. The stern, there were 33 people on board. This crew that shouldn't have been out there to begin with, the rescue crew, saved 32 of the 33. The other one was the cook on board. His name was Tiny. You kind of vision what he was. He was over 400 pounds as a cook. And he was in the galley. They still had gas. He was cooking eggs, as many eggs as he could cook because of the warmth, so people could put the hard-boiled eggs, the hot hard-boiled eggs in their pockets to keep warm. So he was very hot in there. It was a winter night. And he, finally time for him to go, he came out shirtless and climbing down the ladder and fell into the water. The crew couldn't, not only because of his weight, but had nothing to grab on. All it was loose skin. And it was an emotional experience. They lost the guy, and they really felt they should have saved him. There was nothing. He was between the ship and the boat anyway by the time he fell in the water. So logically, it was no way of saving him. But you couldn't convince them that. They felt it was a failure on their part. Far from it. When they got back in, the Coast Guard came down and said, Bernie, we're going to give you a gold life-saving medal for this, which was the highest level of medal for a rescue. And they said, and we're giving your three crew members silver life-saving medals. In typical Bernie Weber fashion, he said, no, either we all get gold life-saving or not, or we all get silver or we get none. We're all in this together. They finally ended up, and well-deserved, they gave all of them gold life-saving medals. Bernie was that sort of a guy. I'm sorry, I'm digressing here a little bit. And later on in his career, about 20 years later, he was in command of a patrol boat with a 12-man crew on board. And they said, Bernie, you're about to retire. You're at that age. Your retirement ceremony is coming up this summer. We want to have a large ceremony for you because you've been in the news. He wasn't a news seeker. He was very low-key, very quiet. But they said, we want to have a big ceremony for you. And he says, I'm just not interested. Now, just let me retire. And he said, well, Bernie will be good for the Coast Guard. He loved the Coast Guard. So he said, okay, I'll go to my retirement ceremony. And he said, oh, by the way, your patrol boat is being shipped over to Vietnam with a crew. He says, no, not me. And he did go over with the crew and spent 9 months over there with the crew, and the crew all came back safely, as it turned out. And it was that sort of a guy. He just wouldn't accept praise for anything, one, and just protecting his people and so forth. Long answer, Bernie Weber, yes, he felt he had to go out with his crew, and he had volunteers in the crew to go out with him to do that. But that's not, I really tried to dispel that motto when I was at the headquarters with Search and Rescue. You have to go out, but you don't have to come back. No, we want you to save people, but we want to give you the right equipment to go out. Now, today, we have all sorts of choices. We have rescue swimmers and helicopters, and there's not all that decisions to make at a time. We've had so many cases on Cape Cod, even before the Coast Guard or Life-Saving Service was here, where people were drowning offshore. There's one in Nassau, it's north of Nassau, I think it was up in the Toro area. It was a vessel sinking off in there. All the people were on the shore, the townspeople, maybe 50 of them. I'm not sure what the number was, but it was a vessel just within hearing range, maybe 100 yards offshore. But 100 yards in the middle of winter, people aren't going to be able to swim in from there. They would be dead from hypothermia. They could hear the people out there screaming up in a mast saying, save us, save us. And so a couple of guys on shore, young men on shore, said, we got to go out. So they got a small boat, and as you might expect, tragically, they went out and they were lost too, and as were all the people aboard the ship. But there's this, what makes a hero? Somebody pulling someone from a car that's burning with the possibility of exploding? Well, that's a hero, obviously. Are we the ones that would sit back and not have that heroism and run in? I don't know. Would I do that? Would I run into I have run into a few burning homes, as it turns out, but I didn't really feel in danger. I don't think someone that's really a hero says, typically the response from that, anyone would have done it. Well, no, in the case of Bernie Weber, not only would not everyone have done it, but very few would have had the ability to do what he did to save those people. Any other questions? That's a long answer. I try to keep. Yes.
That wasn't a long answer, but very interesting. Is this memorial painting fully funded?
Almost. I think would welcome we were about 180,000 into it, a little bit more, and this is down in London. This next few days, I'll be down there with this painting and some others with the artist, and try to get some other people on board. But no, so if anyone's interested, we're very close. It's going to happen. No question about that. But it's a significant event for the Coast Guard. As I said, it's a legacy. There's nothing like this has been done. It's very hard to tell with the picture looking at here in sort of glossy form. When you get this to be 16, 17 times this size up in the wall in a state house, it will be glorious. As I said, I showed you this before. We should go with that, I think. I can't get back this one. Yeah, I think this one would work, but I'm not sure. This one here, a good painting, very good painting, but it's not the drama. This is it tells a story, and from that perspective, it's a good painting. And the winter time, snow on the ground and trees, and it tells a great story. But it's just not. This Russ Webster is phenomenal. If as I said, he's over in Mystic. Part of the story with the painting is that the cadets that were chosen to be models for this. Now, what models did? Well, I can show you here. As I said, he didn't choose me, but he wanted a model for up here and up here. And I didn't really appreciate this. I'm not an artist, but the reason he wanted a model is so that not that they would stand there as he painted. That's not the way they do it. They take a picture, but he wanted a guy here that was actually on a table like this with a lantern holding it out like this, so to see how the light hit the face and the arms and so forth, and do that accurately. The same up here to see how the light hit these hats and so forth. And I said, that makes a lot of sense. How did you do that? I've never thought of it that way. So he had the models here, but the guy here is a Massachusetts resident, which we felt was important. He was a first class cadet, which is a senior at the Coast Guard Academy. Just graduated 2 months ago. Now is an ensign in the Coast Guard and stationed out in Hawaii, sadly. Yeah. He was the co-captain of the crew team, which is appropriate for the setting. But he was also, and probably most importantly, he was a great-great-grandson of Keeper Chadwick, who was a keeper of a life-saving station down in New Jersey that had a heroic rescue and won the Gold Life-Saving Medal, the Congressional Gold Life-Saving Medal for his heroism. And coincidentally, on top of all these Boston local times, the vessel that was named after him, a fast response vessel, the Chadwick, the cutter Chadwick, is now home ported in Boston. So it all ties together perfectly. It's all these elements that have come together. Having active duty Coast Guard play these roles, if you will. They're not really playing roles. It turns out that these people right down here were the artist's next door neighbors. He said that when you come down, Greg, I'll give you a paintbrush and I may allow you to put a little thing in the corner here. I don't really need that, but it's kind of fun to have a historic painting like this that I can say that I contributed to or detracted from, whichever you did. Any other questions? This is I tried to keep this under an hour, but we've come close to that. We started out, Bill, a little bit behind, but not too far. Questions? Come over and see us. I would love to show you around over there. I'm there a couple days a week. I try not to be there full time. My wife accuses me of having a mistress. She says, my wife, by the way, I met in first grade, so she knows way too much about me.
Well, Greg, I want to thank you. I think this was great, wasn't it? We learned a lot. And again, I think on behalf of everyone here in the Historical Society, I want to thank you for your 31 years of service, and then going beyond that to help preserve this heritage and this history and make Cape Cod a special place. So thank you so much.
By the way, I should add just an element. There was a little career after the Coast Guard. I spent 5 years as the COO at the New England Aquarium in Boston, which was a great experience. I really loved that. Then it was really time to retire after that. So, if anyone really feels generous, this is not an attempt to grow. There's a QR code here that we're using down in Connecticut for people who want to make small donations. They can go into a PayPal, but don't feel, I am a New Englander, as most of you are. I don't feel comfortable asking for money. That's not my strength. I think I have some strengths, but that's not one of them. But thank you. It's fun to give these talks. This is the first time I've given this talk because this is all fresh off the press. If you will.
Oh, that was pretty good.
And it was, I've given variations of this, but focusing on this paint, as I said, the paint is almost wet still. I'm quite not only impressed by the painting itself, but the frame. This is not, as I said, most of this gold in here. It's turned out to be, instead of gold background and black lettering, it's going to be black background and gold lettering, and the eagle stays gold. But it saved a few $1,000s by cutting out a lot of the gold, and I think it's better with not so much gold.
Do you plan to keep a replica at the Coast Guard Heritage Museum?
Yes, there are. We actually, as said, our committee is an ad hoc committee. As soon as the thing is delivered, we're gone. I mean, none of us are in the same organizations at all. Just got this group together. So we actually physically, the painting is gifted to the governor. So the admiral from the district will go over at the ceremony and will say, "This is now your painting." The State House, that's a long answer to your question. The State House has specific restrictions on, first of all, when they get a painting like this, no one can reproduce this painting in its original form, meaning on a wall. Let's say, they're good friends up there, so I don't mean to, but let's say the Newburyport Museum in Newburyport, the Maritime Museum, wanted to have the same painting. They can't do it. They can't paint it. The artist is free to do other paintings, and just that what's the definition between a new painting and the old one? Is there a subtle difference? They just put a different lighthouse here? I don't know, but they have a very specific. That said, the Art Commission has agreed to allow us to make some copies of it. For example, for the large donors, particularly those over $5,000, we'll probably produce something on canvas to give to them, maybe of this size or smaller, to give to them. And then in our gift shop, we'd like to have some too, and for other purposes. So there will probably be some available, a limited quantity. It might be 100 of these. I've been very impressed. This doesn't seem like it would be that way, but even a company like Staples in a print shop there can take something like this and put it on canvas, and it looks spectacular. It's amazing. They can do it. This is obviously not on canvas, but so those are some of the ones we'll do. We had, I mentioned before, in the early stages, he had, this is early in the summer, he had to produce a final oil on canvas color study, it was called, for final approval. So that was a real large painting. We actually had it up for a while. We used it for a couple of events, and we thought that we could buy it because the contract said he could keep that, but we were going to see if we could get it from him. And he said, "Well, Greg, you can, but I was going to be selling it for $20,000." And we said, "Nah, I think, frankly, in a museum with kids running around and so forth, I'd rather have one from Staples for $300 or $400 rather than a $20,000 painting up on the wall." So the answer is yes, we will have that. In fact, next year we have a changing exhibit gallery. Right now, we're kind of sad to take this down because it's been very successful. It's about Coast Guard arts and entertainment, dealing with film and music and books and art about the Coast Guard. That'll be coming down next year. The new exhibit will be Birth of the Coast Guard, and it's going to deal with these elements. And the painting, there's a fireplace in the changing exhibit gallery, an old one from the Customs House was built in 1856. So it's an old fireplace from back then, and it's a great mantle over top. This will look perfect over that. So thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.